Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to another Love That Dog poetry lesson. So, as we know, we have Jack, and we've started the book with him. And we also know that Jack has read this poem in his class, The Red Wheelbarrow. Well, we're going to go to the next poem that Jack's teacher is going to read to the class, and that is a poem by Robert Frost. Many of you might have heard of Robert Frost. He's a very famous poet, and his poetry is typically about nature. So here we go. It's called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake, to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Okay, definitely different from that Red Wheelbarrow poem. You can see the nature part, right? We're talking about the woods. We've got his horse thinking something strange and talking about some snow and things. Did you hear the rhyming words? This poem is definitely set up with a rhyming pattern. And I don't know if you know this, but when we're talking poetry, it's not like your regular text. Regular text, you talk about like paragraphs, right? Sentences and paragraphs. Poems do not have to have sentences in them. And they're not called paragraphs. They're actually called stanzas. So you can see these little groups here. This poem has 4 different stanzas to it. And there are different lines within each stanza. We're talking about the different lines of a poem rather than the paragraphs of the poem. And if you look here, know, though, and snow all rhyme. But the word here does not. And when you go through this, we would call this an AABA type of a pattern, because the things that go together, they're the same. So that's that AA for the rhyming. B, because we change up the sound, and then an A again. And then you'll notice queer, near, and year all rhyme, but not lake. Same thing with shake, mistake, and flake. Those things rhyme, but not sweep. And then you have deep, keep, and then it just so works out that sleep and sleep. So it gets changed up a little bit in this last stanza with the rhyming, because you have the repetition where they repeat this last line. And some people kind of wonder, well, why would you repeat? Who knows? Maybe it's to really emphasize that he's got so far to go before he sleeps. I don't know. So here's the poem that was read. And now let's find out Jack's reaction to it. Okay, remember, Jack's not real wild about poetry. So, October 17th. What was up with the Snowy Woods poem you read today? Why doesn't the person just keep going if he's got so many miles to go before he sleeps? And why do I have to tell more about the blue car, splattered with mud, speeding down the road? I don't want to write that about the blue car that had miles to go before it slept. So many miles to go in such a hurry. Notice this part right here seems to be borrowing some of the words and phrases a little bit, some of the same ideas as Robert Frost's poem, right? A lot of good poets will kind of look at the style of another poem. It's just like when we were doing our opinion essays, when we were doing our informational writing. There were model text, right, that we looked at in those video lessons that are the same style of writing, but yet different words, okay? So it's okay to have the same kind of style, the same kind of feel, as long as it truly is your own. And that's what he's done here. He's talking about that blue car, but he's kind of borrowing this idea of miles to go, but he doesn't have to quote it because it's not exact phrasing. So, I wonder what his deal is about this car that had these miles to go and why he doesn't want to tell more about it. that's not going to be our focus today. I mean, yes, we did read part of the story, and yes, we would like to know more about Jack and his, car that was hurrying down the road, and why was it in a hurry, and why did that even come into his mind? But we're going to switch gears. So left you with a little cliffhanger, if you will, wondering more about Jack. And now we'll go into alliteration. Alliteration is a form of figurative language because a lot of poets will use some form of figurative language in their writing. Now, you don't always see the same types. This particular poem that we read from Robert Frost, it had that repetition of sound at the end of the word. Alliteration is repetition of sound at the beginning of the word. So whereas rhyming is, sounding the same at the end, alliteration is sounding the same at the beginning. So your assignment today is going to be working with alliteration. And I'm going to go into present mode for this one so that it brings it up a little bit larger on my screen. And you can see it says alliteration is when the beginning sound of a word is repeated 2 or more times in a phrase or sentence. So examples, Tommy took 2 tomatoes. Notice how they all have that t at the beginning. Or please pass the plate. Notice the p, p, p. Or the beautiful blue butterflies. The b, b, b. The whole she sells seashells down by the seashore. That is a perfect example of alliteration. So you've probably seen alliteration in your lives way more than you thought. So what you get to do today is use at least 3 words from each box to create an alliterative sentence. You can use other words too. So you're writing a sentence, so it's not a poem that you're doing today. So we still want to remember that if we're doing a sentence, we want to start with correct capitalization. We want to have ending punctuation, okay? Tomorrow you'll write a poem and you don't have to worry about all that capitalization punctuation because poetry you can do kind of whatever. But for purposes of today, we want to still remember how to write a good sentence, but you're going to be using alliteration. And you can add in other words. So like on this number 1, sauce, slipped, sorry, said, Sam, saw, some. It says to use at least 3 of these. And obviously, what sound is being repeated at the beginning? The S, the S. Okay. Now you don't have to use all these words. If you want to and you want to challenge yourself, go for it. You can move those around, make them make sense for a sentence. But if you would rather not, as long as you use 3 of them, you're fine. So maybe I would want to include, what might I want to include? Maybe if I was going to do this, maybe I would say Sam saw some sauce spill. Okay, that would work. That would be using 4 of these words. Or maybe I could say silly Sam. See, I've added in another S word. Silly Sam slipped on some sauce and said sorry. Ooh, now I used a lot of those words. So you can have some fun playing around with these. But again, when you type them, make sure you use correct capitalization and punctuation because the directions ask you to write a sentence. So there's 7 of them. You're going to write 7 sentences using repetition of the beginning sound of the words. And that's all there is to it, boys and girls. Good luck with your alliteration.